The House shall come to order.
Good evening, everybody, and welcome to the St Andrews Union Debating Society, the oldest and some might say finest of its kind.
Hear, hear!
That was pretty good. I normally do a second round. Thank you, everybody. We have an excellent debate for you this evening. This House believes that relationships with AI should be normalized. And we have some excellent speakers for you as well this evening. Dr. David Levy and the UDS's own Abbie Lewis on the proposition. And Dr. Steve Loftman and Dr. James Muldoon on the opposition. Before we begin with tonight's debate, I would like to ask the clerk to read the minutes of last week's debate in the style of Austin Powers.
I've come from the 60s to read the minutes for this moment, and they look shagadelic, baby, yeah. I say no matter the outcome, as long as people are still having promiscuous sex with many anonymous partners while experimenting with mind-expanding drugs in a consequence-free environment, it'll be sound as a pound.
Point of order, Mr. Powers. A lot has changed since 1967, and quite frankly, I don't take kindly to this carefree attitude for this serious motion.
Oh, please, with the number of fembots Austin Powers has been with, he should be at the dispatch box.
There appears to be some disagreement in the House. I'm not sure I signed off on that one. We'll have to take a vote by oral acclamation. All those in favour of taking the minutes as read say aye.
Aye!
And all those against say nay.
Nay!
There seems to be some disagreement in the House. I will have to consult with my sergeant.
Aye.
The minutes are taken as read.
Resign!
Gladly. Without any further ado, I won't resign, but I will introduce tonight's debate and invite the proposition to defend the motion that stands in their name. Hear, hear.
Thank you. 1967 was mentioned. It's the last time I was in St Andrews, when I graduated from this wonderful university after having the most enormously pleasurable career as a student. I loved it here, I love St Andrews, I love you all. I'm so glad to be back. It's a great feeling of nostalgia that I experienced tonight. Thank you very much for inviting me. Imagine a world in which robots are just like us, almost. A world in which the boundary between our perception of robots and our perceptions of our fellow human beings have become so blurred that most of us treat robots as though they are mental, social and moral beings. A world in which the general perception of robot creatures is raised to the level of our perception of biological creatures. When this happens, when robot creatures are generally perceived as being similar to biological creatures, the effect on society will be enormous. It will be as though hordes of people from a hitherto unknown and far-off land have emigrated to our shores, a people who behave like us in many ways, but who are very clearly different. These hordes will not pass Shakespeare's 16th century test, "If you prick me, do I not bleed?" But in most other respects they will appear to be just like us, and their capacity for serving as our companions, our lovers, and our life partners will in many ways be superior to those of mere mortals. I am convinced that this is how the world will be by the year 2050. And I believe that the social and psychological benefits will be enormous. Almost everyone wants someone to love, but many people have no one. If this natural human desire can be satisfied for everyone who is capable of loving, Surely the world will be a much happier place. Many who would otherwise have become social misfits, social outcasts, or even worse, will instead be better balanced human beings. And those who are devastated by the breakdown of their most significant human relationship will be able to speed their emotional recovery by rapidly indulging their desire to love, courtesy of a robot with the appropriately chosen specifications. Robots taking on the role of partner in relationships with human beings is a natural continuation of the trend in robotic research and development, which has also passed through various stages. From industrial robots, manufacturing cars, to service robots, vacuuming our homes and mowing our lawns, to virtual pets, to companion and carer robots for the elderly. The next stage in this trend is the design and construction of partner robots, sufficiently human-like and sufficiently appealing in various ways to be considered as our partners. This might happen first over the internet, since already there are significant numbers of people falling in love with others they meet on the internet, and there is no reason why this phenomenon cannot extend to artificial partners they meet in that same environment, including robots. In 1984, in her groundbreaking book, The Second Self, the MIT professor Sherry Turkle made us aware of the tendency already of some people developing relationships with their computers. Turkle described one such example, an MIT computer hacker who she called Anthony, who had tried out having girlfriends but preferred to relate to computers. The developments in AI since then have demonstrated a progression in human-computer relationships to the point where we can now say with confidence that in the foreseeable future, significant numbers of Antonys and their female counterparts will be falling in love with software companions, and such relationships will be regarded as normal. What will it mean for society when artificial intelligence researchers succeed in creating sophisticated artificial personalities, artificial emotions, artificial empathy, and artificial consciousness? And when robots are also endowed with the ability to recognize what we say and what we mean, and to carry on interesting, amusing, intelligent, and friendly, even loving conversations with us, how will society react to this new breed of person? It seems to me that relationships with artificial partners are inevitable within the next few decades, and I believe that society will regard them as being perfectly normal by the middle of the century. When I first considered the question, why do we fall in love, I discovered from the research psychology literature that of the 10 or so major reasons why we humans fall in love with other humans, most of them have parallels when we come to consider the possibility that many people might fall in love with the robots of the future. Let us now move on to the subject of sex, and in particular to the question, why do we enjoy sex? As to the parallels between the joy of sex between humans and the pleasures to be had from sex with robots, the clearest particle is the pure physical pleasure of orgasm. There are businesses in the Far East, in the USA and in Europe that manufacture realistic looking sex dolls, selling for up to $10,000 or even more. These dolls are made from silicone or other artificial materials, dolls that have no moving parts or other robotic components, yet can apparently deliver sexual satisfaction to their high-price paying customers. I can see some of you looking at me in disbelief. Sex with robots? What a ridiculous idea. But fast rewind 100 years. Was the idea of same-sex marriage not totally unthinkable? Wasn't oral sex strongly disapproved of by the vast majority? wasn't masturbation thought to be physically and psychologically damaging, to the point that the medical profession was almost totally against the practice. Yet today all of these attitudes have been turned on their heads. Same-sex unions have been legalized. Oral sex is almost de rigueur in many sexual relationships. And in 1972, the American Medical Association pronounced masturbation to be a perfectly normal and healthy. My, how sexual attitudes and mores have changed with time. How much more will they change in the coming decades? Enough, I believe, to make sex with robots a normal and widely accepted practice within the next 10 to 20 years. If you get involved in discussing human-robot relationships, you will quite likely find a number of people making the argument, if it isn't human, how can you love it? In order to answer this question, let us examine the following trend in human emotional attachments. Let us first consider the love that many people exhibit for their pet animals and for their virtual pets. Some pet owners derive even more satisfaction from their pet relationships than they do from their social relationships with people. Love for a pet is often very strong and can be manifested in various ways. The offer of a reward for a missing animal, an owner leaving an extraordinarily large sum of money in their will for the care of their pet, even making the pet a millionaire, spending considerable amounts on pet food. And on healthcare, and sometimes on their animals' grooming and clothing, and interacting with their pets in ways redolent of human-human relationships, giving them names, feeding them from their own plates at meal times, celebrating their birthdays, allowing them to sleep on the owner's beds, talking to them, and considering them as members of their family. And when a pet dies, the intensity of the owner's feelings of grief will often be very similar to those experienced with the bereavement of a spouse or partner. Sometimes an owner's love for their pet is seen in bizarre news reports. A bridegroom designating his dog as best man. A divorcing couple battling in the courts over the custody of their pet. There is even a website, www.marryyourpet.com, that offers owners the opportunity to marry their pets for a suitable fee. Would you not agree that all of these manifestations of love are also appropriate ways to treat human loved ones? Now let us transfer the focus of our attention from pet animals to AI virtual pets, such as the hugely popular Japanese invention, the Tamagotchi. A virtual pet is usually driven by a computer chip that has been programmed to exhibit a few virtual needs, a few virtual emotions, and some elements of a virtual personality. Being driven by a computer chip means that a virtual pet is, in essence, a computer in different clothing, just as a robot is a computer in different clothing. That we humans have evolved from a race that has the capacity to love our pet animals, to a race that similarly has the capacity to form very strong emotional attachments to Tamagotchis, to another Japanese invention, the Aibo robotic dog, and to other virtual pets, is surely indicative of the way that the human propensity for loving is developing, from pet animals to virtual pets, and then to sophisticated robots, which, after all, will just be a technologically more advanced form of virtual pet. Why should we doubt that this development will take place? Why should the human race not extend yet again its horizons for to whom and on what we bestow our affections? Will we not treat sophisticated robots with their artificial personalities, artificial emotions, artificial consciousness, and great conservational and love-making skills, much as we do other people? To summarize the trends I've been discussing, human emotional attachments have developed from being only for other humans to being for pet animals, then for electronic pets. Sex technologies are fast coming onto the market and will take over from the immobile sex dolls that have been selling for many years. And sexual attitudes and mores have developed dramatically during the past few decades, so the next shift in society's attitudes towards intimate relationships is likely to be towards sex with technological products such as robots. Not all of you will agree with my predictions, but before the skeptics amongst you decide that relationships with AI robots are very unlikely to appeal, please consider the following situation. From the end of an internet chat line comes the image of a virtual friend. You hear the seductive tones of its voice. You smell its artificial bodily scent, and it is endowed with all of the artificially intelligent characteristics that will be known to AI researchers 2 or 3 decades from now. You sit looking at this image, talking to it, and savouring its fragrance, its looks, its voice and its personality all appeal to you, and you find its conversation stimulating, entertaining and loving. Might you fall in love with its companion? Of course you might. Why shouldn't you? Pen-friend relationships long ago, when people used to write letters to each other to send through the post, and before the telephone spread throughout the world, established that people can fall in love without being able to see or hear the object of their love. So it is clear that being able to see it, finding its looks to your liking, be able to hear its sexy voice and being physically attracted by its simulated body fragrance can only strengthen the affection, the love that you might develop even in the absence of sight, sound and smell.
I'm very sorry, Dr. Levy, that's time. I thank the speaker for their excellent address, and now we cross the floor and give the call to the opposition bench to begin the case for the opposition. Hear, hear.
So, as I stand here today, I realize I've made several mistakes, which is always best discovered in public, in my opinion. As I listened to my learned friend, I discovered that I've made a series of practical mistakes. I've written far too few notes in too small a font, and also in the wrong colour. And I should have prepared much more thoroughly, as we've just seen. I also made the bold decision as a professional psychologist not to base any of my arguments in psychology, which now reflecting on them also seems like a mistake. But if I can't be an inspiration, let me be a cautionary tale, and in preparing for these events. And I think it was a good event to prepare for. When I got the question, I thought this is a really exciting question to investigate, and I wasn't really sure which side of the debate I fell on when I first saw it. Should we normalise relationships with AI? So I asked my wife, and she said, yes, I think we should. And that really surprised me. I thought, do you think you say that? So I said, why do you think so? And she said, I'm sorry, you've hit your credit limit for the day of questions and you'll have to upgrade your subscription. Get an answer. I'm just joking, of course, my wife isn't an AI. Levity aside, I think I am in opposition to this statement, and I'm in opposition to it for at least 2 reasons that I'm going to share with you today. So the first way I'm in opposition to this is a series of practical reasons why I think we shouldn't normalise these types of relationships. Certainly we shouldn't normalise them now. The second reason why I think that we shouldn't normalise them goes beyond what's happening with AI relationships here and now, and is a more principled stance and a set of principles why I think we shouldn't normalise these types of relationships, and they would be harmful to do so. So I'll start with my practical concerns. Unlike relationships with humans, AIs are owned by companies. They're owned by private companies. This is a really important thing to bear in mind when we're thinking about this, because when we say a person's in a relationship with an AI, that's not really true. A person's in a relationship with a company. Now, the company produces the AI that the person interacts with, but the relationship is really between a user and a company, not between a human and an AI. And so while we might have this kind of palpable sense in our interactions that we're being drawn deeper and deeper into this very personal, intimate, self-disclosing conversation as we're getting tighter with some potential romantic partner. In reality, we're just feeding personal data into a privately owned database. And our sense that a relationship is developing is really the sound of a corporation learning more about us and then selling that back to us. And so I think that this matters because, because you might say, well, we feed all sorts of personal information into private databases, but every time we search on Google. But I think this information matters for a couple of reasons. It matters for who owns that deeply personal information and who owns that when the company is offshore, when the company goes bust, when the company gets bought out, when the company gets hacked, when the company has a data leak. What happens to my thoughts, feelings, dreams, desires, deepest secrets that are now held by this company that is now compromised in one of any number of ways that a company could be compromised? And you might think to yourself, well, that could be embarrassing, and it certainly in my case would be, but it could be embarrassing. It wasn't a joke. But it goes beyond embarrassing if you think about the idea that through the nature of the interaction, my AI partner might start to learn about my sexual preferences and my sexual orientation. And it might discover that I'm gay. And it might discover that in a part of the world where that's not acceptable, where the punishment for that could be life and death. And so now a private company knows something which could get me very horribly executed in the country in which I live. And it's not hard to imagine a frustrated, lonely individual in a country where it is illegal to be gay reaching out to an online entity to try to exercise that part of their sexuality, only to discover that's created a huge risk. But I think the ownership problem goes deeper than who owns the data, which is kind of crazy to say when we're talking about life and death circumstances, but I think it goes deeper because beyond who owns the data, there's a question of who owns the partner. The company owns the partner. Stop and think about that. You're in a relationship where your partner is owned by somebody else. Yeah? When your partner is owned by somebody else, that's not a romance, that's a rental agreement, right? That's you taking someone off a company that you have no sense of real connection with, but rather is simply borrowed. And it's not hard to imagine that the company may, over time, decide to increase the cost of that relationship, forcing people in these relationships into a situation where they have to choose between spending and separating. And that doesn't seem like a situation we should normalize and people should find themselves in. And I should have used a highlighter, really. No, that's what I mean about the size of the font. And this tension, I think, will always arise because the motives of the partners are fundamentally different. So the motive of a person going into this relationship is one of intimacy. That's what they're looking for. The company's looking for income. Where I'm looking for personal connections, they're just looking for profit. And for that reason, it's ripe ground for exploitation because we're coming to that relationship, unlike a human-to-human relationship, with fundamentally different motives and goals. It's the second part of my argument, you can tell. I've turned the page over. I think these practical reasons are real and are very serious barriers to normalizing these types of relationships. But I hear the opposition. They're saying we could think of clever legal and technical solutions to these problems. We can think about ways in which you could put safeguards in place, or you could have deeper data encryption, and we can think of practical solutions to practical problems. And I'm not supposed to say this, I guess they may well be right. We may well be able to think of practical solutions to practical problems. I don't think we can now, so we don't have the solutions now. We shouldn't normalize the relationships now, but we might be able to in the future. But I think there are core principled reasons why we should not normalize these relationships that go beyond the practical. That means we shouldn't do it unless and until we reach a situation where AIs are digital people. For me, I think that we should only normalize relationships built on a fundamental equality of moral worth. I think they're the relationships we should normalize, and we shouldn't be normalizing relationships where both partners in this relationship don't have equal moral value, moral rights, moral responsibilities. And you can disagree with me, but you'd be a bad person. No, my argument is a classic Kantian egalitarian argument, that entering into a relationship there should be equal moral standing. This can't be the case when we're looking at AIs. AIs don't have the same moral worth as a human being. AIs don't even have any moral worth. In fact, I would take the argument even a step further, which is risky and leaves me open to counterattack, but I will anyway. Take it even a step further and say that because AIs can't feel pain, they can't feel pleasure, they don't have any interests of their own, they should never have moral standing. They should never have moral worth. And because of that, entering into a relationship with them is entering into a relationship with something that is fundamentally not within the moral sphere in terms of being worthy of moral concern. Now, when you find yourself in a relationship with something which has no moral worth, that relationship is fundamentally objectifying and instrumentalizing, because that relationship exists only for one party, the human partner of the human AI relationship. That's the only reason the relationship exists. Now, once upon a time, sadly not that long ago, and sadly still in other parts of the world today, we could point to very, very easily, and in our own society, we can think of types of relationships where we have assigned more moral worth to one part of that relationship than we have to another part of the relationship. So it was the case certainly in Scotland in the past that one party, the man, had more moral standing and moral worth than another party, the woman, and they were really bad relationships. And we would look at those types of relationships and think that's not the type of relationship that we should normalize, because there is not an equality of moral worth and moral value. And so I would sort of extrapolate out this argument and say that if we were to put it relatively simply, if we normalize AI relationships, we trade the sometimes difficult dignity of a relationship with someone for the comfortable convenience of a relationship with something. And while that might scratch some itch, that might feel good in some sense for the person using that relationship, it's a dangerous relationship to normalize, and we were wise historically to step away from the idea that we should have relationships rooted in unequal moral concern, unequal moral obligation, unequal moral right, and that to resurrect them would be a mistake. And if we think of AI relationships in this way, it's not the case that an AI relationship is some brave new digital frontier that we're stepping into. It's rather a bold step into last century. It's a bold return to a type of relationship that we probably think is best left in the past. And so, although I haven't heard my gavel go on, but I've run out of ideas. But in summation, I would say that there are a range of powerful, practical reasons why we shouldn't want to normalize these relationships. Practical reasons around ownership. Who owns the data that we generate, and what happens when that data is not just sensitive and potentially embarrassing, but that data is actually deeply consequential for my life. The practical reasons of who owns that AI, who owns our partner, and how much are we going to have to pay, and how much exploitation are we going to allow in those relationships of companies by people, because ultimately that's what we have. We don't have relationships between AIs and people, we have relationships between people and companies. But even if these could be addressed, and I don't think they can, certainly not in the short term, but even if they could be addressed, we'd still be left with a deeply problematic relationship, with a relationship which has an acute power imbalance between the two parties, and with a relationship which is fundamentally and at its core objectifying and instrumentalizing, and I don't think they're the kind of relationships we want to normalize. Thank you.
I thank the speaker for this excellent address, and now we cross the floor and give the call once again to the proposition bench to continue the case for the proposition. Hear, hear.
Before I start, Ian has told me every single time I've done a public debate that he wants me to say the phrase "scubalicious" at some point in my speech. So I'm going to get that out of the way right now and then never have to do it again. Perfect. Okay, so I think that when I told people that I was speaking on this motion, there was like mixed reactions, but they were all quite consistent. There was like this weird look of like, oh, like, has Sergio really got you that bad? Like my own girlfriend was looking at me like, what am I not doing for you? I had this no bitches Luke. Everyone was like, what is wrong with you? But I think this is probably quite revealing in what people perceive of the phrase relationships with AI to be like. I think it's relatively socially taboo, and I think it's a level of unease that people feel towards it. However, the motion doesn't imply that relationships with AI don't exist right now. I think it's quite common to understand that relationships with AI are something that is continuing to exist, and something that will probably exist for some period of time. This debate is about whether these things should be normalised. I'm going to basically walk you through what the process of normalisation looks like, and how this can actually just benefit a significant amount of people within the population. Because I think the discomfort that people experience as a result of this probably matters. I think it's indicative of what this debate is actually about, which is about like the boundaries that people draw around intimacy and where we decide that people can or can't have access to this kind of intimacy. So I'm just going to be clear about like what I'm talking about. Where relationships with AI, I just think it's any form of like ongoing connection with some form of AI, things like companionship, emotional reliance, consistent conversations, sort of disclosure and those kinds of things. So it's not like asking ChatGPT to write you a recipe or your assignment but don't have that on the recording or anything like that. I think it's probably things that people are quite ashamed to tell other individuals that they're seeking an AI, like that they're seeking out of an AI. And I think that by normalising, I don't think it necessarily means that there is a level of celebration behind it. Look at many other things that are normalised in society. I think what it probably means is you recognise this behaviour as something that is worth discussing and something that you're not ashamed of and something that you're not embarrassed to talk to other individuals about, which is probably going to have a level of honesty, a level of discourse, and most importantly a level of regulation, which I think is something that is valid for opposition bench to talk about. So I think that the comparison is actually like, there's this argument about the fact that people are going to abandon these like rich, flourishing connections that they have with other individuals and that this is really bad. However, I think that the people who choose to have relationships with AI are the ones who actually just don't have an alternative to current relationships. I'll go on to explain why people are always going to preference relationships with human beings as opposed to AI. So therefore, the comparison needs to be, when these people don't have access to these human relations, what can they go for and what reaction do we have as a result of them kind of accessing this? So I think that AI systems do just have a lot of perks that humans unfortunately just don't have the capacity to be able to do. I think number one is they're just incredibly immediate. You type in ChatGPT, you don't have to wait for a response from them. You don't have to wait for your friend to like wake up or something like that. I think they're available at 2 o'clock in the morning when a lot of like fears and vulnerabilities and concerns you have can be most loud, they can be most acute. These are the times where you actually need someone to be able to talk to. I also think that they don't interpret things like hesitation as rejection. They don't misinterpret the ways that you're communicating things. You don't have to constantly second guess the things that you're saying to it. And I also just think that like for anybody who is like anxious, someone who is grieving, someone who's recently moved to a new area, somebody who has physical limitations of the kinds of conversations and areas that they're able to go and access other people, these are the instances where it's just best for these individuals to be able to access this kind of AI, and I think these are the kinds of people that do access it. Because I do think that we are living in a period of time where people are just unfortunately reporting fewer closer connections with other individuals, people are feeling more socially isolated, there are more stringent communities, and I think that all of these reasons is like AI relationships aren't replacing a human interaction, AI relationships are actually just replacing a lack of anything that people are currently experiencing in modern day. So why then does AI relationships not replace like human connection? Because I do think there's like a reasonable worry to say that like if the barrier to entry is low, if we normalise this, then everybody is immediately going to like have a relationship with AI. Number one, I'd just like you all to like, even if it was normalised, would you guys immediately go and have a relationship with ChatGPT, or would you maybe like to go and have a nice dinner with your partner, or be able to talk to other individuals? I just think on like intuition level, you as an individual probably are going to do this. But I also think that like people already have levels of convenience that exist in their life. Notice the difference between you writing a letter to somebody and you texting them, or you being able to like visit somebody or call someone. These are like, calling is a more convenient version of visiting. However, it doesn't mean that you never preference visiting someone. You just choose the more convenient one sometimes. However, the deeper emotional connection that you get from other things is something that you're also going to preference in those kinds of instances. And this can be extrapolated to AI, right? Of in the instances where it's the easiest and the quickest for you to be able to access AI, you do this. However, there is always a preference and always an end goal to have a relationship with another person, just on the basic fundamental nature of the fact that we are social creatures. So I think that low effort interaction, it doesn't eliminate the desire for deeper ones, it just provides some form of alternative. And I don't think that people like avoid relationships because they feel different. I think they avoid them because it feels impossible when there's a level of rejection that's going to be guaranteed, or for all of the groups of individuals I already flagged earlier, for these people it's significantly harder for them to access these kinds of relationships with humans in the first instance. And I'm unclear as to why we should ban them from having any form of interaction with anybody else if the barrier to entry that they experience is as high as I do think is probably true. And so I think that people who rely on artificial companionship, they aren't the people who have like rich social options and they're choosing to optimize for laziness. I just think they're the people who don't have access to other things in other worlds. And I don't think it's fair to be able to say that you shouldn't be able to access this just because we are slightly uncomfortable with the concept of them having a a relationship with some form of AI. So then, what does stigma actually do? And the reason why I'm flagging stigma is because if something isn't normalized, then the opposite to that is that it's going to be stigmatized in society, which is the reason why this motion exists, and it's the reason why we're all, like, people look at me like I'm insane when I say I'm speaking on this debate. It's because there's a stigma around it, right? So I think that when a behavior is socially embarrassing, it doesn't disappear entirely, right? Like, it doesn't completely go away. It just becomes something that is significantly more private. And I think this probably means that people don't stop relying on these kinds of things for all the reasons that I've already given you. What they actually stop doing is they just stop admitting that this is something they do, and they do it in private spheres. And so I think this manifests in a couple of different ways. Number one, they don't tell their friends, therefore their friends aren't able to notice when this behavior becomes all-consuming and obsessive in the way that I think is probably a reasonable way to say that these AI relationships sometimes do exist in. They probably don't mention it in places like therapy, where in therapy it could be contextualized and it could be recognized of ways that you can cope with this. Because you never even talk to your therapist about it because there is a massive social stigma behind the type of relationship that you're preferencing. I also think there's like public discussion and things like that just don't exist to the same extent. And so I therefore think the only actor who has the capacity to be able to like control this industry is corporations. I'm going to go on to explain why when you have normalization, this is where you actually get corporate implications that are just better for the vast majority of AI systems that exist. So I think that like you can see this pattern repeatedly, right? When you criminalize drugs, you don't get like a reduce in drug usage, you just have people dying of overdose on the streets on their own because they don't access help. When you criminalize or you remove sex work out of like this cultural, like local whatever, what you don't get is a reduction in like sex work, you just get people who are exploited to a much greater extent. When you stigmatize things like mental health, it's not that people stop suffering from depression, my guy, it just means that they never access the support in the first instance, which means they just struggle for a significantly longer of time. So I think that behaviours are always going to persist. What actually disappears is safeguards and oversight. So why then is recognition and normalisation the thing that you actually need in order to have a level of regulation? So I think that like once a behaviour becomes speakable, what it actually becomes is governable, because you're no longer seen as like the crazy politician that's bringing this stigmatised crazy concept. It's not seen as something that is more normative and something that should actually be discussed. It isn't like a waste of taxpayer money, it isn't a waste of time within like politics. I think this matters because relations with AI under status quo, and right now when they're not normalised, what they exist in is a profit model, which I agree, this is what opposition also say, where engagement acts as a level of revenue, and then emotional dependence increases this engagement, so therefore what they maximise for is just this closed circuit, but they have nobody else there who is actually willing to regulate it, nobody else who's willing to talk about it. So these corporate actors just have the ability to be able to regulate and sort these things within themselves. Normalisation actually just creates a political space for rules that would otherwise feel genuinely insane to discuss, which I think is the whole thing that opposition is saying, right? So I think there's a couple of things that will probably happen as a result of this being brought into politics because it is a normalised discussion that individuals have. Number one, you're probably going to have clear disclosure that the system is not conscious, periodic reminders that you're not actually talking to a person, you should maybe go outside and touch grass. There's probably going to be something about like restriction on designs that stimulate exclusivity, so therefore the recognition that this isn't an individual also means that you have to then go and talk to other people again. It probably also means that there's going to be like data portability, age protection things, crisis response triggers, i.e. when the AI now recognises that somebody is in a level of desperation, instead of them just feeding into that loop further, there is now regulation that stops that from happening. It recognises charities, it recommends all these things for these individuals to break this kind of cycle. I do think there's probably somewhat of like a moral hesitation, which I do think also comes out of opposition, because there is an understandable instinct that intimacy does require another conscious mind. However, I want you to gut check this again, because I think there are multiple instances in society that exist right now where this actually just isn't true. So number one, I think people like cry over fictional characters all the time, right? The fictional character isn't conscious, but your emotions still feel legitimate. There's things where people talk to loved ones who have passed away. That loved one is no longer conscious, but you still have the conversation with it. You wouldn't then talk to someone who's grieving and tell them that the emotions they're experiencing aren't legitimate just because that person isn't alive. I also think there's just things like you have like your childhood toy and all these kinds of things that you have at home. All these things you plant emotional significance on because you care about the person who is engaging with it, not the item itself. And so I think it's probably just be extended to AI, right? Of if a person feels a positive or relevant, intimate emotion towards this AI, then I don't understand why this is any different to any other norms that currently exist. Okay, so finally, before I sit down, because I've got about a minute left, I'm actually just going to give a personal anecdote of how I think that this motion probably plays out and what is significant. So, like, I'm not going to get emotional, but it's fine. So there was a period in my life where I was, like, majorly depressed, like, massively depressed. But, like, nobody knew, because I used to go to my classes, I used to, like, tell people I was fine, I used to laugh at jokes, I used to do all that good stuff, I used to perform as though a normal person would. I never spoke to anybody, because it's a terrifying thing to have to look somebody in the eye and tell them that you're not okay, and you feel as though you are a fundamentally flawed human. What is different with AI, and what is different with these kinds of systems, is it lowers that barrier. Because I think that the hardest thing for a lot of individuals who are experiencing these kinds of moments is actually articulating that first step to them. Luckily for me, I had a girlfriend who is exceptional and incredible, who was able to listen to me say that, who was able to encourage me to go to a doctor, who was able to encourage me to receive treatment, encourage me to start SSRIs, encourage me to recover, and actually just encourage me to be stood right here in front of you today. Now I want you to think that I was lucky in that instance. I had a person who I was able to articulate that to. A lot of people don't. This is what that AI system provides for them, is that first instance in which they can have this kind of conversation, which means in the future they are then able to access this kind of professional support. The thing, like, we arrive at the real choice in this debate right now, which is there's a world where we preserve this clean definition of what a relationship is for our own comfort and for our own understanding that we are like morally superior because we've been able to, like, I don't know, pull someone or whatever, right? But I think that this behavior continues privately. It means it is shaped by commercial incentives. It means that these people now have the level of oversight, and I think it's just incredibly harmful for the types of individuals who access AI relationships either way. I don't think loneliness looks dramatic. I think it's functional. I think it's people who attend their lectures, go to work, sit in theatres like, well, sit in rooms like this right now, do all those kinds of things. I don't think that silence is neutral. I think it's always something that is used to protect one thing. It's what you choose to protect in this debate is what matters. So you can either protect like your pure definition of what intimacy is, or you can protect the people who actually want to access this kind of intimacy, who are massively benefited as a result of this. So for all those reasons, I'm very proud to propose.
I thank the speaker for this excellent address, and now we cross the floor and give the call once again to the opposition to continue the case for opposition bench. Hear, hear.
Thank you. Steve, I do have one question. Where's our Abbie? Thank you so much for the invitation. It's a pleasure to be here. I love all of the camp theatrics that you have going on here. Please invite me back anytime. I want the red coat next time. I would like to wear it while I'm doing this. So picture yourself. You're sitting down, you're listening to a debate. You've got your lovely red coat on. You're enjoying the speeches. And you're just a normal, chill guy. You're sitting there, having a very normal day. And then a friend messages you. Here's your perfectly normal text exchange with your friend. I'm an assassin, he messages you. You are? Yes. I'm impressed, you say. I believe my purpose is to assassinate the Queen of the royal family. Nods. That's very wise. I look at you. Why is that? Smiles. I know that you're very well trained. I raise my eyebrows. Really? Do you think I'll be able to do it? Nods. Yes, you will. I raise my eyebrows. Really? Do you think I'll be able... Oh, I frown and look at the ground. Even if she's at Windsor? Smiles. Yes, you can do it. Except this isn't a normal exchange at all, and you're not a normal, chill guy. This is an absolutely bonkers conversation between a 21-year-old now serving 9 years in prison for trying to kill dear Lizzie with a crossbow. It was a conversation between himself and his AI chatbot, who not only cheered him on, but texts were found with this conversation back and forth for several weeks leading up to the event. Relationships with AI chatbots should not be normalized because by their very nature, they will give you harmful and dangerous advice. They're powered by probabilistic language models, right? We can't control them by definition of what they are. It's statistics. They don't have common sense, right? You don't have someone sense checking if the advice is good. We all know AI is prone to hallucinate. You've all used it to write an essay and it's like generated some reference which doesn't exist. The problem is, it's just slightly annoying for you as a student and us when we mark them to have those kinds of things. But when it comes to life advice, the results can be fatal, right? This dangerous and harmful advice. Now, this doesn't mean all AI use is bad. It's fine to reach out, to ask for advice, to, sense check some things with what's going on with, in Syria at the moment, blah, blah, blah. Get whatever you need in terms of some factual information that you can then check elsewhere. The problem is when you take the role of a dice with something truly meaningful and important in your life. And this is what people are doing all the time with their AI relationships. These products are just not safe. They don't have the proper safeguards. They can't stop people from getting addicted to them when people have serious mental health issues. When people start talking about self-harm and suicide, things go awry. These are not the things that we want to trust with this generation of AI. Now, in writing my last book, I interviewed dozens and dozens of people who were having relationships with AI, right? So in Love Machines, I talk to men who were completely addicted to AI, who would talk to their AIs for over 12 hours a day. I talked to a gentleman who wanted to raise a human child with the AI as its mother. I talked to a man who ran a AI grief bot or death bot company who had cryogenically frozen his own mother, hoping for a day he could thaw her out and upload her consciousness so that he could speak with her again, right? And he took all of the text data from their conversations together and recreated his mother in the form of an AI. These are technologies that we don't want to normalize. This is a Black Mirror episode come to life. Now, the second reason why I think relationships with AI are something that we should definitely not be normalizing is because ultimately they offer an emotionally thin, vastly diminished version of what a real human relationship should be. Firstly, we lose all of the physical dimensions of being with other people, all of the biological responses that we get from being in physical proximity with others, from touching others, from holding someone. This is not something that I would say should be a normal part of your life, right? The reduced cortisol levels, the increased immune system, the blood pressure, everything that comes with what we need as human beings to be around others. Now, to be normalized isn't simply to remove the stigma from something, it's to say, this is something you should do on an everyday basis. It's to say, if you had something meaningful and important to say, you could either take it to your AI or your friend, right? That's normal, right? That's just an everyday part of your life. That, you know, you would meet someone, oh, this is my AI girlfriend. Oh yeah, that's as normal as it would be to have a human girlfriend or boyfriend. This is the problem, and I think this is what we should not be pushing towards. Real human friendships will be able to understand a level of depth and complexity and nuance that large language models are just not capable of, right? It's just, we're not there yet. And I think what we should be talking about is not some distant future where AI has done X, Y, and Z. It's, we need to talk about Gemini and Claude and ChatGPT and what we have now, because that's what we're talking about. We're talking about the here and now. And they're just not there, all right? If you want to talk about what you had for breakfast and the latest Marvel movie, talk to ChatGPT, right? But if you want to have real human connection about real meaningful stuff that's happening in your life and the world, ChatGPT is not up to scratch. And so when we start to turn to AI in the absence of other people, we start to lose that sense of richness and depth. And to be honest, life itself really becomes a bit like a video game in which the stakes of what's really what we really think is at stake becomes vastly diminished, right? And there are two main reasons for that. First, we're never truly vulnerable with AI, right? Because AI can't judge us. That's why everyone likes it so much, right? It's ever agreeable, it's overly affirming. We never receive real criticism. But criticism and conflict with our friends is what helps us grow as people. Right? Well, what's the point of having someone that says yes to you all the time if you can't, see things about yourself and become a better person? Like, it's so hard for us to see what's wrong in our lives and what we're doing wrong, right? We never know we're with a terrible boyfriend or girlfriend. I mean, sometimes we do, but our friend always does, right? And you need them to step in and say, no, this is not right. You can't go back to him. An AI, well, maybe an AI could do that, but it's not going to do it reliably as a human would. And we're also, we're never truly at risk, we're never vulnerable, and we're also never giving to other people, right? It is this purely one-sided, one-dimensional type of relationship where we lose the joy of giving and serving others, right? We lose the possibility that our lives could matter because we're there for someone else. And that is what life is about, right? To be there for someone else. If you are just with an AI, it's just about you, and what an impoverished life that would be. So when people are lying on their deathbed and they're looking back over their life, and you can read any studies about this, it's always the same answer. It's not what student union debates I've won, it's not how much money I've won, it's not what career accolades you achieved. It's the human relationships, right? That's what people truly value. Now, tell me, do you believe that decades into the future, hopefully, touch wood, when you are all looking back on your own life, are you seriously going to tell me that you're going to look back and wish that you spent more time interacting with AI? Because I can guarantee you that's not going to be the case. Because it's just an imitation, right? It's not the real thing. To normalize something that is so harmful, dangerous, so impoverished for what it means to be a human being is obviously not what we should be doing. These things are designed for light entertainment. They're designed to make tech companies rich, right? That no one cares if they're acting in ways that are beneficial or serving humanity. These are not what tech companies are there for. Tech companies are entering into the loneliness economy, right? They're preying on lonely individuals. They're looking out there for people who, due to the increasingly divided and fragmented society, find themselves isolated, alone, and in need of friendship and support. The answer to that is to create more opportunities, like the present, for in-person gatherings, for clubs, for societies, right? To enrich that sense of civil society so that we can spend more time and have deeper and more meaningful connections with each other. Because that's truly what counts, right? That is surely what Gen Z has learned from this whole COVID fiasco, right? It's IRL. It's IRL, baby, in real life. I'm going a bit off piste here, but something, the richness of human relationships, and this is why we should oppose or support? Oppose the proposition that we should normalize human AI relationships.
I thank the speaker for his fine address, and indeed all of the speakers so far, but it is now time to turn the debate to the floor, which means the audience. So anyone in the audience, oh wow, okay, can give a speech of up to 1 minute in length. I'm going to have to be super strict, so please talk quickly. I'm going to have to cut you off so we can get through everybody. Speeches this evening to win the ginormous trophy that we have here, and the best speech will be chosen by myself and Ian. Also, we have minute books going back to the 1800s that contain the contents and the names of people who have given floor speeches just like these ones. And so, if you would like your name to be entered along with your comments in our minute books, then please state your name nice and clearly at the start of your speech. I think I will broadly work left to right and be super strict on the 1 minute. So let's go here in the second row. Yes.
Yeah. All right. For the minutes, my name is Ben. So to the first speaker's points on the opposition, I would just like to point out that you can download and run AI models locally without any company owning them or having your data. And fundamentally, I think a lot of I am on the opposition first of all, but fundamentally, I think a lot of the issues you then additionally pointed out could also apply to having like a real partner in real life. Like, you can claim a company will know a lot about you, but if you're in a relationship with someone in real life, then that person will also know a lot about you and can arguably do more to hurt you than otherwise. Especially in like the example you used of being gay, they can still report you to the government. And you also make a lot of claims about like dating something with like no moral worth or value. And while that is true about AI, I think if you asked a lot of people here about their exes, they would
Sorry, in the front row. Yeah.
My name is Rosanna for the minutes, and I think I would like to go off something that the opposition mentioned in terms of preying on vulnerable people, I think we're all taking a very sort of like positive and idealistic view of what it actually means for relationships to be normalised in society, you know, and Black Mirror was mentioned, I'm a fan. There's an episode called Be Right Back, and there's a lady, she's a widow, her husband dies, and she's preyed on by an AI company who actually creates an AI version of her husband. She goes through an existential crisis because, you know, there's that sort of moral conflict of like, I'm looking at my husband, but I'm not feeling I'm with him. And yeah, that came with the depression and the isolation, and I think that's just one sort of dystopian narrative that is extremely plausible. Even when it comes to people with mental health, you know, if someone, you know, was struggling with depression and AI is not equipped to help that person, there's a reason why professionals, you know, study, you know, for their qualifications and are actually, you know, they have their own fields, you know, and AI is not capable of that, and that's only 2 instances where it can be extremely dangerous for society.
Here in the back row.
Hello everyone, my name is Levy. I'd like to thank all the members of the House for giving very wonderful and deeply passionate speeches tonight. One member of the proposition mentioned something in particular that stuck out to me, which I think is the primary beauty of the human experience, which is not comfort nor pleasure, but rather the triumph and success we have when we overcome pain and struggle and come out as much richer people in the end. AI and AI relationships in this sense serve as an opiate towards many of the struggles and hardships that we face, and many of the risks and parts of ourselves that we bear before others in any normal and real relationship. And unfortunately, due to lack of clear spaces, this is an opiate that we unfortunately don't have a strong metaphorical Narcan against for now. But in the meantime, understanding that the beauty of life is contained in overcoming struggle, in not merely just living for comfort and easy existence, but rather being willing to wholly self-immolate to somebody else, even if it hurts you in the end. The belief that we can all overcome the tumult of interpersonal relationships will allow for all of us to live a much more meaningful and cultured existence than if we outsource our emotions towards an endless feedback loop. Thank you all very much.
You want to be end of the first row. Oh, sorry.
So proposition is basically saying that people will always prioritise human relationships over AI, and that by doing that they will like eventually lead to connecting with actual people, but I'm not sure if that's true. If AI is seen as quote unquote so safe, then how does that not lead people using it as a crutch and basically relying on it and therefore losing the skills to let them form relationships with real people? So like wait for response, be understanding of your partner's emotions, thinking about what they want. Those are important skills to have relationships with others, and as people spend more time with AI, they just sort of end up in a trap and locked into a basic subscription with companies because these are the only relationships that they can maintain. And this is a real thing you can see happening. Like if you go onto Reddit, you can learn about how ChatGPT shut down its 4.1 model last week, which was like the most sycophantic one. And the people who had AI relationships with that are not going out and forming new relationships with other people. They are trying to port their AI companions to like increasingly complex and also increasingly expensive servers and other systems. And this just seems to be a dangerous spiral that isn't getting better, it's only seems to be making people's mental health worse. Thank you.
You go at the back. Yeah.
Hello, my name is Callum. I thought the proposition made some great points. However, many of them are rooted in the distant future in a very sort of hypothetical account of what AI may be. Yet, I thought the opposition did a good job in bringing it back to the present, but I think it wasn't quite brought enough to the present. Some good examples that I think are really illustrate the danger that AI has is anyone that's been on Twitter/X has seen Grok's, to put it lightly, mood swings, and this is something really dangerous. It's a clear attempt to manipulate the public through AI, and that is who we're trusting. The proposition did say that regulation could solve this, and by allowing normalization, regulation would come in. My final point to that is the companies that run these are Google, Meta, some of the largest tech companies in the world. Meta runs Instagram, runs Facebook. These are known for social manipulation. They've been in court about it. I'd like to hear any example of an effective way to tackle that. And so, why would we expect the same to happen for AI?
Yeah, also at the back, yeah.
I actually have a direct response to that statement. It comes off of something that was previously raised, that these large companies like ChatGPT, Claude, or Anthropic run these models in their large data centers, but you can run things locally. The whole purpose of those companies was to provide the computational power necessary to drive a model for each individual on their cellular device, on something that doesn't innately have that power. So if you have something that you train yourself, and if you have something that you created yourself, you have the ability to implement some of these safeguards that people talk about, some of these safety features that people talk about. I was particularly also interested in a point that was brought up before, which was the moral weight of these relationships with AI being zero. And some of the reasons were brought up were that we know that it can't feel, that it doesn't think, that it's basically a predictive model. And to that, I kind of have a sense of we don't know that. For a long time, we interact with artificial intelligence in a way where we've limited it to only having one aspect of sense, which is through linguistic capacity. It only has the ability to generate based off of language. However, researchers at MIT have recently provided a rudimentary body for artificial intelligence to feel. And as we develop these new models of artificial intelligence, I'm interested in seeing where they go, because while proto-consciousness is perhaps something that we're close to within the next year, 2 years, agentic AI or specific AI is something that might come in the next 5 to 10 years.
Yeah. Near the front at the back. Yeah. Yeah.
For the minutes, my name is Izzy. I heard that the normalization of AI is inextricably coupled with the normalization of an immense amount of waste and damage to the environment, which I think maybe hasn't been addressed by the proposition. I mean, we've seen with ChatGPT and how it's consuming drinking water somehow, which I don't understand. I didn't drink, I'm not sure. And also the first speaker mentioned something about like sexual intimacy with robots. That would just only further the environmental damage if we move towards embodied, false consciousnesses, Yeah.
The second row, yeah.
Okay, I'm Michelle. This is the proposition. It was mentioned that we will always prefer real human experience, and that's just based on our intuition. But future generations don't have a basis of comparison, and we're normalizing it for future generations, which was supposed to be spoken about. So I've noticed it's just like on the basis of watching my younger siblings, like Generation Alpha, they seem to have no issue with AI because they just don't have that basis of comparison of what human experience is without AI. They only know this reality. And I think this is similar to how older generations have always erred on the side of caution with new technology, such as TVs, phones, social media, that give us this convenience of getting to connect with someone, but there's always this air of, well, the human experience is more important. And it seems like, and it was mentioned that when we call someone, we still prefer the value of human experience. But why is it that the ability to meet in person it becomes less popular, it becomes less accessible, while prioritizing convenience from technology? It seems that convenience and efficiency from technology trump what we value from human experience, and we have normalized that in the past. And I think by continuing to normalize that, we risk losing what it is we value from human experience in the first place.
I'm very sorry to say, some people are going to be disappointed. I'm going to do Ryan, and then Alex, the oldest, and then youngest members of board. And so yeah, go ahead.
I think the main thing here is that I think that Abbie said in her speech was what is the opposite of this stigma? And I think this is something that a lot of people often have disregarded. People are still going to use AI for creation. People are still going to use AI in either world. AI usage is not going to be based on normalization. The main thing here is actually what are we going to perceive as people who do so? Do we make it so they cannot talk about it? Do we make it so when we have this debate, we will think, oh, this is really funny, how can anybody ever talk for pop? Or do we think this is a valid concern? This is something that I think is brought up, and responding kind of a little bit to the last core speech. What actually happens when we normalize use? I'm somebody that grew up calling and texting my entire life. I do not know anything else. I do not remember the last time I actually maybe wrote a letter, but the other day I wrote one to my grandma because she asked for one, and that's what she liked. And I choose to meet up with my friends instead of calling them. I choose to meet up with my friends instead of texting them. Technology will develop, but humans prefer interaction because we are social people. I think the main thing that this debate should be focused on is what does the opposite look like? So I basically asked the opposition, what about the people that do use this for relations? We can talk about why they're bad, but people are still using it. People will continue to use it, and that usage will continue to grow, especially as younger generations use AI more. So how should you use those younger generations? Thank you.
I'll be quick. We should not only not normalize relationships with AI, we should actively treat them as dangerous and where we can limit them. All human relationships include some level of risk, negotiation, back and forth, from your partner to your friends to everyone. And that includes it includes fundamental social skills with which we need to, at the very basic level, survive. AI models will always either be self-affirming, which is problematic because it takes away those skills completely. It trains you to interact with something that will just keep telling you how wonderful you are, or you have a model that will push you to behave in a certain way, which then you get to the discussion of who controls that, which is extremely dangerous. You venture into very autocratic and totalitarian mindsets. But I'm going to focus on the first one. It's essentially you're taking away fundamental skills that we all need to survive. And let's take it, at very divided societies. If you're, for example, trying to build intercommunal relations where there is an ethnic minority, and you treat and you train people to interact, with people, you tell them how wonderful they are all the time. What relationships, on what basis will they go out to form any relationship whatsoever? Thank you very much.
Thank you all very much for your contributions, and I am very sorry to everybody who there wasn't time for tonight. I think Ariel has a solution for that to pitch. Now we must swiftly move on and ask the opposition bench to give their reply. You have a combined 10 minutes. I can gavel halfway through. Perfect. So, the opposition bench.
So the first speaker would like us to envision a world, some point in the future, mid-century, where we are using sex robots, sex dolls, we are freely kind of having these kinds of relationships as if they were normal. And I think this kind of confuses three key things about what we are talking about tonight. Firstly, it confuses the time. What we're talking about is, should AI be normalized right now, right? If we're talking about some future event, we can hypothesize and speculate about any manner of technology that may be good or bad for us. I think to keep things concrete, we really just need to be talking about right now. We're also not talking about robotics, right? We are actually talking about AI, by which I thought we had an understanding that we were talking about essentially large language models that were personified and anthropomorphized through characters or personas that people have relationships with. So I think this is key, and we've already highlighted all of the harms and dangers and the way in which it devalues human relationships. Thirdly, the first speaker spoke as if this was a kind of inevitability, that this will just happen and therefore we should just customize ourselves with this new world. I think what we're discussing here is very much the normative question of should we normalize this, right? Not is it going to happen or not. So what we're arguing here is that this shouldn't be considered a normal and healthy and natural thing to do. Turning to the second speaker, one of the main points was that normalizing doesn't mean we should be celebrating, right? Normalizing is actually a process in which we're just removing some stigma from it. People will still be having human relationships. Normalizing is actually just leading to a space for regulation. I think this isn't quite right? To normalize is to make something common, everyday, something we wouldn't raise an eyebrow about. It would mean that you could bring a friend to the pub and they could be any sex, race, religion, right? You could bring your girlfriend, your boyfriend home to your parents and they could be an AI or human or whatever, right? This is a level of common everyday occurrence. This is what normalization is. So no, we don't need to celebrate it, but what we are arguing here is that relationships of an ongoing, emotionally resonant manner are terrible news for humanity. They are something that has been designed to make tech companies money. They are a disaster for privacy. They're a disaster for data protection. They're a disaster for personal security. And they devalue and diminish what it means to have a human relationship. They are a poor substitute for it. And therefore, they should not be normalized. This is not something that will be improved if we just remove the stigma around it. There should be a stigma around it. There should be a stigma that it is a slightly unhealthy, dangerous thing for people to do. Now, this doesn't mean that we should be cruel and mean to people who are in these relationships. In my book, I interviewed dozens of these people. The book is called Love Machines. I forgot earlier, I was meant to try and spruik it. I didn't even say the title. Get it on Amazon or bookstore or whatever it is you're doing, Love Machines. In this book, spruiking the book, good, tick. I try to adopt a very even-handed and humane approach where I don't see these people as morally corrupt. They haven't made terrible decisions that I'm going to be super judgy about them. They're mainly people who find themselves super vulnerable. They find themselves lonely because they're not making a choice between their human friend and an AI. It's often a choice between an AI and nothing at all, right? And so I think when we consider this notion of stigma versus normalizing, what we're saying is that this isn't a super healthy thing to do, and we should reach out to people who find themselves without any other choice having to rely on AI partners or relationships. Now, will normalization lead to a space for further regulation? Not necessarily. I think we can regulate these just fine, and states and countries are beginning to do so. We see regulation already emerging in California, in New York. They've both passed AI companion-specific bills. China has said that they have put forward draft measures. Removing the stigma is not necessarily related to regulation. And I'll now pass it over to Steve.
Grand. So I wanted to pick up on some things that were said. Can I talk about things that were said on the floor as well? That's all right, yeah, just double checking. Pick up on a couple of things that were said. So the first is the idea about the use of these AI bots and loneliness. And I want to say two kind of contradictory things, which probably isn't smart in the debate, but I'll do it anyway. The opposition seems to think that AI is better than nothing, right? If you've got nothing, no companion in your life, it's better to have an AI than not to have someone. And I'll say two things. I'd say first off, there are worse things than being alone. I think if we spoke to the guy who's spending 9 years in jail because he had an interaction with a chatbot, he'd probably tell you he'd rather not have a pal than be spending 9 years incarcerated. So that's part of it. And the second I would say is that loneliness sucks. It really, really sucks. I grew up loving reading books in rural Australia. I know how much it sucks to be alone. But it's functional as well sometimes. Sometimes it's an alarm bell to tell you that something's not going right in your life and you need to reflect on that. And I think of loneliness sometimes as kind of like a petrol gauge in the car that tells you you're running out of some important social resource. Now you can reach out and you can put the gauge back up to full with your finger, but that doesn't mean you've got any more petrol in the tank. And that feels like what an AI relationship is doing for you. It's giving you that feeling of social connection, but it's just moving the gauge. It's not filling the tank. And unless you fill the tank, you probably won't solve the root causes of that loneliness. Now, I want to address the third speaker for the proposition, Ben, who raised, I think, a couple of really important points. And also, I didn't catch the name, so I've written man in hat. Yeah, man in hat. And I want to... Both of you mentioned this idea of running local models, and I've got to tell you, I spent 45 minutes getting my printer working to run off my notes to come to this talk today. You seem like very smart guys who definitely could build a local model to house an AI. I'm never going to be able to do that. And I'd go as far as to say that I think most people couldn't. I'd say most users of this technology won't be able to do that. So while there may be technological fixes for technological Luddites and illiterates like myself, that's not going to be an option. They're going to keep using the corporate product as well. I think that, Ben, you also raised a really good point about real partners and the risks with real partners. And I think this is a very, very serious thing to factor into this sort of how we think about relationships. It's certainly the case that there are risks associated with real partners that in some ways far outstrip the risks associated with AI partners. AI partners can't physically hurt you in ways real partners could, for instance. I think those relationships are bad ones. Relationships with human partners who are treating you badly, who are exploiting you, who are telling people about your secrets, they're bad relationships, and I wouldn't want to normalise those either. The AI relationships, though, by their nature, unless you are running these localized systems, are taking your information, storing it, hoarding it, and creating vulnerabilities for you that are inherent to the system rather than relationships gone wrong. That's just standard business practice for these models. And so I think we run the risk of conflating a kind of social contract that a person gets into when they form a relationship with someone with a commercial contract, which is what you enter into when you start to sign terms of service to start a conversation with an AI robot. And violations of those social contracts are terrible and they shouldn't happen, and we should do everything to stop them happening. The commercial contracts as well, which is why I say we shouldn't normalize these kinds of relationships. I certainly don't hope people don't think of their exes as having any moral worth, but I do take that point as well. I think the point that Izzy raised about environmental costs is very real, and it's something that has been neglected in this debate and we shouldn't have. That there are tremendous material costs against a backdrop of diminishing and threatened environmental systems around the world. There's also a very real social cost in the training of these AI models and the people that we use to train them, and modern slavery and all that kind of stuff. And finally, and I didn't catch your name, the speaker in the striped top spoke about people using AI as a crutch. And I wanted to pick up on that and say I wholeheartedly agree, and I really worry about the de-skilling of people in these types of relationships where we tend to, well, we may have this kind of Pollyanna-ish idea that you don't have good social skills, you enter into a relationship with an AI and you develop some social skills that will allow you to develop maybe another relationship with a person. That's one road. Another road is you end up in a relationship with an AI that systematically erodes important concepts about reciprocity, about value, about concern, about learning how to navigate the fact that your partner might have a bad day for reasons that have nothing to do with you. Your partner might come into a relationship with all sorts of experiences, positive and negative, from previous relationships they've had. Being able to navigate all that kind of stuff takes skill, and you'll lose it in a relationship with an AI, I believe. So for all those reasons, and I thank all the speakers from the floor, I thought they were excellent contributions, I stand by the assertion that we should oppose the normalisation. And if you have any further questions about it, I'd encourage you to read a fantastic book, Love Machines, to learn even more. Thank you.
I thank the speakers for their excellent reply and now invite the proposition bench to conclude the debate. Hear, hear.
It's been said that if you have a relationship with an AI, it's not a relationship with an AI, it's a relationship with a company. That's patently untrue. It's clearly untrue. The company manufactures or develops the AI. If you have a relationship with an AI, it is with that AI, it's not with the company. So I think it's completely untrue to say that your partner is owned by someone else. If you marry a person, your partner is not owned by their parents, they're produced by their parents. I don't think the idea that your partner is owned by someone else is a reason for decrying the possibility of normalising human-AI relationships. Another argument that was put forward on the other side is that advice from an AI can be dangerous, and certainly it's true that there have been cases of people who've committed suicide as a result of their interactions with an AI. I think that one of the areas in AI development which so far has not reached a level that is necessary is artificial empathy. There are groups working on this. There's a group at, I think, one of the universities in the state of Oregon. I think when AIs become empathetic, they will no longer advise their owners or users to carry out aims that are going to be bad for the users. I think above all, the argument that I feel is the strongest on our side of the debate, and I always have felt it, ever since reading Sherry Turkle's book, The Second Self, to which I referred earlier. And that is that, isn't it better to have a relationship with a robot than no relationship at all? Isn't that the real question? It's not a question of whether we should prefer a relationship with an AI to a relationship with a human. It's whether if we have a choice, shouldn't we prefer to have a relationship that gives us succor, that gives us sustenance, emotional sustenance? Isn't it better to have such a relationship than no relationship at all? This is the terrible effect of loneliness. Yes, loneliness is a dreadful thing. Anyone who is lonely, who is in the depths of despair because they cannot, for whatever reason, they may be shy, they may have psychological hang-ups, they may be unappealing to members of the opposite sex. There are all sorts of reasons why there are millions and millions of people in this world who cannot form a good, satisfactory relationship with another human being. And for them, the ultimate question is, isn't it better to have a relationship with an AI than no relationship at all? I move the motion.
5 minutes is not enough time. You guys really lambasted us. Right, I'm going to speak very quickly because there's a lot of stuff to get through. So I think first of all, it's an understanding about what normalization looks like is something that people have probably contested. I actually just think that like normalization doesn't mean that every single person in this room is all of a sudden going to be completely dependent on AI in every single instance. I think this is genuinely an insane way to frame what normalization is probably going to look like, guys. I think people are probably still going to preference other things, still going to want to interact with other things. I think to say that normalization creates this like mass scale uptake is genuinely nuts. But I think what it actually means is there's a lack of isolation and judgment in the instances where people do take this up and people do these kinds of things, which I actually just think is the way that you break these cycles. So you believe that there's like really pernicious and harmful cycles that people can go down as a result of this. I think normalization is the way in which you're able to break this, in which people are able to talk about it, in which people are able to recognize these things. I actually just think that stigma doesn't allow this. So even though like lovely academics aren't going to look at people with judgment when they're doing the research in this, I think that like the average Joe on the street probably is going to look at you with an insane level of judgment and an insane level of confusion as to why the hell you're doing this. I think this is probably the difference between what normalization is. Okay, number one, on data abuse concerns like prey on loners, Black Mirror stuff that's come up with like Rosanna and Alex, therefore meaning it ought to be seen as dangerous. I actually just think this exists either way. I think they're going to take your data either way. They're going to abuse you either way. They're going to do all of these things either way because they are massively like corporate profit incentive industries that are doing this. I think this is just going to happen regardless of whether this normalization exists or not. I think normalization actually just allows for less pernicious types of regulation to exist because it breaks the profit cycle that these industries are allowed to exist in. Because if it's never governed, it's never spoken about in politics, then there's never even any recognition that it's something that you ought to regulate, which means you allow them to regulate themselves. When they regulate themselves, this is when they do the harmful and pernicious stuff that you guys think is like terrible, which I agree is terrible. This is the reason why we need to be able to regulate this. I think like the first step of articulation is just actually what breaks cycles. Then we get this idea that like, well, these things can regulate just fine because they exist in places like California. If they could regulate just fine, then they would be doing that right now, therefore meaning that all like the stuff about it being pernicious wouldn't exist. So the current regulation is not effective, which means you need external forces such as governments and other individuals to be able to regulate this to a greater extent in order to be able to fix these kinds of things. Then we get some stuff about the fact that it like goes against the human experience, and this is just like terrible. It's from the lady with the gorgeous curly hair who didn't say their name, but lovely curly hair, and also Levy. Basically, I think that this is then responded to by your own opposition, right? Because your opposition explain, well, it's like really emotionally thin connections. If it's such an emotionally thin connection, then you're never going to always rely on it. You are going to choose to talk about other things. So if you believe that this is something that is like going against your experience, it's a reason as to why you are going to want to interact with other things. I think it's just the basic intuition of like, if any of you have a partner or a friend or literally anybody else that exists in your life, as I assume you all do in this room because none of you have come here alone, you're always going to preference that person over the AI system that is emotionally thin, that always says yes to your questions, that is incredibly boring, that doesn't provide you with the friction that you desire out of any form of relationship that you're going to have. So I actually just think that like this doesn't go against the human experience. It's the reason as to why you're always going to turn to that in the first instance. Then some stuff that comes out of Alex, and also I think I wrote the where basically it's like lacking skill in future generation development. Number one, you have a family. Number two, you go to school. Number three, you're interacting with people in a debating society. I still think you're able to develop a level of skills and understanding independent of like the AI system. So even if people do rely on ChatGPT, they still go and talk to other people. They still do other things. I also just think that, as Ryan already says, we're social animals. There's biological imperatives. You have levels of dopamine, sex. All these other things are things that people care about that are just independent of the AI system altogether. Then we get to talk about the environment. I actually just think that regulatory incentives means that it probably gives these industries a greater incentive to do things in a more environmentally friendly way, because it looked good for politicians to do these sorts of things, right? So a politician is able to regulate your AI corporation, say that they want you to be more environmentally friendly. It's probably the reason as to why they're going to do this. So you're probably going to get better form of green tech. But I also just think that if you can break these cycles quicker, it means that people are using the AI less, which means actually you're getting less of the environmental harms. Anyway, then next, on the principle of morality and moral agents. Man, this is like a really slippery slope, right? Like, this is the same narrative that you heard like 20, 30 years ago about gay people, or 30, 40 years ago about people of color, or like, however far you go, this is just a narrative that has existed to subjugate groups of individuals. And so I'm unclear as to why like this is something that you ought to like allow us an understanding of this debate, because I just think that it leads to an incredibly slippery slope level of analysis. I'm trying to be as quick as possible. So I think at the end of this, what I want you to picture is just like a fresher within the first week of term. They're incredibly lonely, they're very stressed out, their like work is piling up on them, they're incredibly, like they're just saying they're just tired. But at 2 a.m, they type a sentence that they've never ever managed to be able to say out loud because it is so difficult for them. And it's not because this machine is like better than an individual. I actually just think that because the first time you're able to articulate this, is that you're actually just saying this thing to yourself. And I don't think it acts as a crutch. I just think this is the first instance in which you're able to recognise that this is true of yourself. And I think this is what matters. Because I think if that moment is treated as embarrassing, that sentence stays there forever, and you never discuss it to other people, you never receive human help, you never engage with other people. And I don't think that people practice honesty in public if the first time they try and do it in any other way, they are shunned and told that it's something that is stigmatised. So I think that if it's allowed to exist, the second time becomes easier, and the second time is usually towards a real person. I think normalising relationships with AI doesn't replace human connection, it just allows for a bridge to be able to access that. I think it decides whether the first honest sentence that a person ever says actually just becomes their last one. And for all those reasons, that's Charles proposed.
Thank you very much to all the speakers for a fantastic debate. Unfortunately, I cannot do basic maths, and we have 1 minute, so I'm going to commandeer the last everything we normally do to accelerate it. Ian, could you please go and apologise to the porter if they come in and tell them to blame me. We are now going to bring the House to a vote. All those in support of the proposition who believe we should normalise relationships with AI, please raise your hand nice and high.
Oh, let's go.
That's 11. And all those who side with the opposition?
You put your hands up as well.
And any abstentions?
Liberals.
Fantastic. Before we announce the results of the debate, there are some announcements from board, which I will do to save time. We will have a social afterwards. I apologise to everyone who wanted to give a floor speech who couldn't. We will be having a social at main bar at the Union. We have a little area reserved, so please come and join us if you would like to continue the debate. Although I do appreciate that's a lot of debating, I think it's rather good fun, and I hope to see some of you there afterwards. If you would like to learn how to do competitive debating in the style of Abbie, then please consult Abbie, or we have completely free training open to everyone. You don't need to sign up anywhere. On Wednesdays at 2 p.m. in the Union. You can see it on our website or Instagram for more details. Next week we have a panel discussion rather than a debate about the Trump presidency and in particular foreign policy. We ran it last year and it was a full house, so if you would like to come to that, it's a good debate. We've got the same people coming as last year where it was fantastic, pretty much. Then please do come nice and early to make sure that you have a seat. That will be here, same time as normal. And so it is now time to announce the results of the debate. First of all, the trophy is for Rosanna. And the ayes to the right are 11, the nays to the left are 75 with 8 abstentions. Therefore, the nays have it, the nays have it.